So I wanted to see if FSR could actually save the boss game U32 when it comes to its ability to play 1080p games. The Ryzen 3 3200U in this specific system isn't exactly the fastest chip on the market. And while its 2 cores and 4 threads based off of the original Zen architecture is pretty brutal on its own, the 3 Vega cores are really one of the biggest deal breakers on it. And really, when the chip originally came out, it wasn't exactly a powerhouse and it wasn't really meant to be a gaming chip. But also FSR was not as ubiquitous as it is now. So we're going to be using a program to inject FSR into a few games to see if we can actually game at 1080p in this specific system. Of course, that all of that ends up failing on us, Hollow ISO might be the last remaining thing to do with this little system. Now, to inject FSR, we're going to be using lossless scaling. There are free solutions that you can use to do the exact same thing, but I like the simple interface of lossless scaling. It also does come with its own neural net trained upscaler called LS1, and we're going to be trying that out in comparison to FSR. So to start things off, I started off with Alien Isolation here, running with the Ultra Graphics preset, and you can see it running at the full 1080p resolution with FSR upscaling. And this is FSR going down to 720p upscale to 1080, and we also have LS1 running. Now, in terms of a performance uplift, there is one happening here, but it is not really enough to push this towards a playable territory. What's interesting is that FSR and LS1 ended up giving relatively similar performance numbers, and really just comes down to visual quality at that point. There are certain aspects of LS1 that I actually like visually speaking, though it does seem to focus a lot more on very sharpening things up. I do think that overall it can produce a very nice image, but after trying out a few games in it, it can be hit or miss on whether LS1 or FSR is the better looking of the two. But I don't really have the right equipment to really show you a proper visual quality comparison between the two, so I can really only give you my anecdotal experience with it. And I know you might be thinking, well, Alien Isolation running at the ultra graphic setting seems a little aggressive. And for the most part, it is, yes, but I just wanted to try out a benchmark that was really aggressive in terms of its settings, but still forgiving on lower end systems. We've seen this game run at above 60 FPS on integrated graphics before at ultra settings, so I wanted to see what the relative comparison would be like with a 3200U getting the additional help of FSR. Flipping over to Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord with the built-in benchmark. Here we see a lot less of any meaningful gain whatsoever, and I think it really just comes down to the fact that we are so incredibly CPU limited in this game that it really just does not make any difference whatsoever. 2 cores and 4 threads is really brutal by today's standards, at least in Windows. It's why I think that maybe a move over to Hollow ISO might actually lead to some gains here, because Linux is going to inherently use less of the background resources, so we could allocate more to the games themselves. At the end of the day, Windows is doing a lot of things in the background that do affect a lot of the performance, the less cores that you have going on. I did also take a look at Batman Arkham Origins running with the lowest in-game graphics settings. I'm not using any of the DX11 enhancements or anything like that, and this already ran relatively well on the 3200U with its absolute lowest graphics settings. So this was really more to see if FSR could net us any meaningful gains whatsoever. But it really seems like in this title there was just no meaningful gain whatsoever. And again, I think it really just comes down to the fact that we are just so limited on the CPU here that there is no meaningful gains to be had, especially because of the fact that FSR does inherently have some overhead. By the very nature of how it works, it is going to impact your performance at least a little bit, because it has to do something to improve a lower resolution. But consequently, what's happening here is that with such a low-end chip like this, it does not seem to be helping much at all. 2 cores and 4 threads is pretty brutal by today's standards. But I think if we take a look at the system on Hollow ISO and use the fact that SteamOS does come with FSR already built in and very easy to activate, maybe we could see some gains there. So I'm going to be installing Hollow ISO on this system. It's going to be pretty much the last major thing that we're going to be taking a look on this specific system before we just go back to focusing on other things. But it has been very interesting to try out the very low end of the Ryzen market. But anyways, stay tuned for more of that. I'll catch you guys next time.